In any case, we would like to give the question and remarks in Hungarian language, no problem. We have interpreter for that. But the lecture will not be translated as so, Mr.
I want to talk about what I think is going to be an inevitable coming global energy crisis, and try and persuade anyone who is new to this argument that there is a problem. What I want to be talking about is the solutions and the opportunities to abate the risk, to reduce the risk. Maybe we can cover those issues if people are interested in the questions. So, the best place to start to understand this problem, I think, is in the United States. And in the year 1956, when a geologist who worked for Shell, Mr. Hubbard, you see his picture there, predicted that American oil production would reach a peak and then collapse. And at the time, as you can see, the oil production in America was rising fast, and most people, I would say, almost everybody in the business of producing oil and using oil believed that Hubbard was wrong and that production would go on and on rising for many decades in the United States. Well, Hubbard was wrong. He was wrong by 1 year. He predicted a peak in 1971 and it hit in 1970. And beyond that peak, American oil production has indeed collapsed. The thing to say about that is, of course, that downward descent has shaped American foreign policy and therefore shaped the world in which we live. I think I won't say any more about that issue. That's a separate discussion. But it's a very steep descent. Okay, so this is just America, but doesn't mean to say that the same kind of pattern will be repeated for the world. But if it is, if there is a peak in production and then a collapse on the global pattern, there is nowhere else we can go. The Americans have been able to adapt their foreign policy. They import a lot of oil, but of course if there is a global repetition of this pattern, then we will have a problem, and it will come as a big shock to all our economies and pose us with many challenges.
I think right now, at the high oil price, you're seeing the first battle in the war taking place. And lots of money is going into renewables. An unprecedented amount of investment money is going into renewables. $100 billion last year alone, out of maybe $1 trillion of investment in energy generally in the world. So this is all very, very encouraging. But at the same time, at the high oil price, lots of money is going into the technologies that we know are causing more global warming. And that includes the tar sands, it includes unsequestered coal to liquids. So this is what I mean by the battle that's taking place. And the outcome of it we have yet to see. But it has to be a victory for renewables and clean energy technology, because if we go down, knowing everything we know about climate change, if we go down that route to unsequestered coal and tar sands, why, we're going to lose our economies anyway because of the effects of global warming, unmitigated global warming rolling across them. And what's the point of that?
And maybe here carbon, putting a price on carbon from can come into play. How do you see that that could certainly help to win that battle? But is it enough in itself, the high oil price and the high carbon price?
In dealing with the twin problems of climate change and peak oil, that there is no one policy that is going to solve the problem or make the difference. It's very important that we put a high price on carbon at some point, and the quicker we can do that, the better. But even that on its own wouldn't be enough. We need really strong policies favouring renewable energy, energy efficiency, energy conservation. And we need the kinds of policies we had when we were mobilizing for war in the 1930s. In Britain and America, people were amazed at how quickly we could build aeroplanes and tanks when we knew we absolutely had to, and there was no choice. And that's what's got to happen with clean energy. That's the only way we'll beat the twin threat of peak oil and climate change.
How do you see that without any huge catastrophe we can get away with it? So with some more Katrinas and it's like that, so we can be that optimistic, or a huge catastrophe is inevitable to take place?
I think we're going to experience more and more catastrophes like Katrina, like the floods that have wiped out the entire agricultural production of the state of Tabasco in Mexico, like the issues.
I mean, when you are telling about smooth landing, what do you mean by that? So what is the most optimistic scenario?
Okay. Well, the most optimistic scenario is that we get governments and companies to listen to the problems of energy ahead of the crisis, and so they take proactive action, and we can just about engineer a soft landing by a real crash program of energy conservation, energy efficiency, and mobilization of renewables. That could happen. Personally, I don't think it's very likely because the denial is just so great. The other end of the spectrum, the worst case analysis, is that production peaks and the descent is a collapse, and in some cases that is so severe that it causes producing countries to wake up to their problem and start keeping the oil and gas for themselves. And then that turns a crisis, an energy crisis, into an energy famine for importing countries, and that will pose dire stresses on their societies and their economies. It's not even then an impossible situation, because that's essentially what happened to Cuba in 1989 when Russia was forced to turn off the oil taps overnight. And people didn't start starving in the streets in Cuba. Indeed, in many ways, they engineered a more resilient society out of the back of that crisis, the special period, as they call it. And we can follow their example in different ways. So, it's not hopeless. It's going to be a very, very difficult problem, but it's not a hopeless problem.
And eventually, last question, could you elaborate a bit on these risk abatement measures? So what exactly needs to be done in order to be proactive? So, because you told about energy efficiency, that houses should...
Yeah, if we knew that an energy crisis was coming in a few months, if we absolutely knew that, the first thing we'd do is put in emergency programs of energy efficiency and energy conservation